All right, welcome everybody to another GoDaddy Pro webinar. This month we're talking about holiday readiness all month long, all October. So we're going to dive into one of those aspects today, talking about payments and transactions. So I will get to introducing us in just a moment. Let me go ahead and share my screen so everyone knows that we're in the right place here. Maybe. Oh, man. Oh, of course, now that's yelling at me. All right, sorry, one moment.
Ooh.
Not quite what I had in mind.
Nope.
It looks like it's going to force me to use Chrome. So, oh my goodness, one moment. It's back on track. I think we would have tested this beforehand.
We did, and then here we are.
Well, why don't you, while I'm doing this, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, folks? This is Nick McLaughlin coming from the Skyverge team. Nick is a technical account manager for the Skyverge folks and is going to be talking to us a little bit about payments and transactional email stuff today. So while I get this sorted out, Nick, you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. I'll give the however long of a life backstory you need for this one.
There you go. Hopefully not too long.
Started back in my My name's Nick. I am on the Skyverge team, recently acquired by GoDaddy. So I work on the as a technical account manager on like a dedicated like WooCommerce support team with Skyverge. I've been around working with WooCommerce for about 6 or 7 years. My start on it was actually with a small business. I'm in Portland, Oregon. And I worked with a small business here, running their site. It was just a shop manager for them. Kind of came to that from a non-technical background, and just learned a lot through that process of managing that site and working with. We had a development agency that we partnered with, that we worked with to kind of get a lot more of the technical stuff going. But I worked with them enough to pick up some stuff. And then, have been with Skyverge and GoDaddy now for just a little over a year, on the support side of things, like helping other folks do the same for their site. So we're talking today about transactional emails and payments. And once we can get our screen share, hey, here we are. Just got to say those two words together and they pop up.
I got the screen share working. The chat is still blank for me. So Nick, hate to do this, but if you don't mind keeping an eye on the chat just a tiny bit, or whoever else happens to be in here, feel free to chat amongst yourselves, and I will get filled in as I can. Thanks, Nick. Again, this is payments and transactional emails in WooCommerce. That's what we're talking about today. Real quick, my name is Marcus Burnett. I'm a WooCommerce specialist at GoDaddy Pro. You'll often find me hanging out in the WooCommerce communities and just talking all things WooCommerce. Like I said, this is part of a series of events that we're doing all month long. This is the second one. If you missed the first one last week, which is the e-commerce store holiday shopping essentials, please do go back and watch the replay that is up now and ready for you to watch. And the next 3 are coming up in the next 3 weeks, and make sure that you go ahead and register for those. But for today, again, we're going to talk about readying your site for payments and transactional emails in WooCommerce. And that, I think, gets us caught up to talking about you, Nick. Thanks for joining me today. Sorry about all the technical difficulties. I'm going to try and continue to maybe work some of these out as we go along so that I
Yeah.
can see some of the chat, but we have our screen share back so we can just push forward and talk about some of these things. Before I do, anything else you want to share about yourself?
I think that pretty much covered it. Yeah.
All right. We will just roll into it, I think, then. Um, this is our checklist, payment and transactional emails checklist. This is what we're going to be talking about today. Uh, Not super important to memorize this. We're going to go through each one of these in the following slides, but I'll kind of read through them so we get a basic idea of what we're talking about. We're going to talk about selecting a gateway and merchant account and a little bit about what that means in general. Connecting a gateway test account, making a purchase using that test account, the development connection, confirming the receipt of your order emails, making sure that the thank you page is um, friendly and helpful, includes the tools that you need, and maybe a couple of other things. Connecting the gateway to the production account so that you can actually accept real payments. Making a test purchase with that to make sure that it's all working. Confirming receipt of order confirmation emails. Yes, again, make sure that you do it both times to make sure, because sometimes changing that will make a difference, and we'll get to that. Um, and then a couple of optional ones if you're running a site that's for like recurring subscriptions for things, making sure that those are working, and depending on your gateway, your ability to process refunds. Again, we're going to go through each one of these as we go through the presentation today, so don't worry too much about missing any one of these because we're going to tackle each one of them. And the end result, of course, is successful payment for you and happy customer. So that's what we're all about here. Um, So let's dive in. Real quick before we get started, this is being recorded, and will be shared later, and we'll have all of the ones in the series up on the GoDaddy Pro events area as soon as we'll have each one after the event, and then we'll have all of them that you can check out at the very end all together. And then don't forget to ask any questions that you might have in the Q&A area in the chat. Despite the chat not working for me right at this moment, I think the Q&A area is still working, so I should be able to see those, and we'll have a Q&A session at the very end and give you a chance to ask some of your questions. All right, so why is this important at all? And we'll go through each of these, and maybe we can talk about them for a minute, Nick, and see. So the Big Five weekend is kind of what we're talking about here when we talk about holiday readiness, and that's Thanksgiving and Black Friday, and then through the weekend to Cyber Monday here in the United States. And this year, that's November 25th to 29th, 2021. And that's happening soon. Nick, that seems like it might be a little far away, but want to tell us a little bit more about what Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend looks like these days? It's not really just that Big Five weekend, is it?
Right, exactly. Yeah, while the big sales and things are really focused on those days in particular, I know especially last year, a lot of places were expanding their sales and their deals outside of that time, to where you'd have the entire week leading up and the entire week after to make purchases, all through this, like pushing this big promotion through that whole time to kind of drive those e-commerce sales during around that period. But what that means is like the prep for it just keeps coming earlier and earlier as well. And I know, like when I was working at the small business here in town, like October was kind of our okay, now we think about the holidays trigger, and I feel like that might even like be earlier now. um it's definitely not too late, if you're working on this stuff now. We're not behind the ball, but it's definitely like the time that folks are working on stuff, even if it feels like, oh, we've still got a month. Like now is the time to be getting stuff set up.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be, I think, just Black Friday, and then advent of e-commerce added Cyber Monday to the mix. Then it was that weekend, and it's kind of just grown and grown every year from then. And it surprises me sometimes just how early I see Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals start to pop up, and
Yeah.
chatter around it and all of that. Another stat here: sales during this weekend in 2020 amounted to 39 billion, up from 28.4 billion the year before in 2019. The opportunity to engage repeat customers is now. It's just going to keep growing every year. Um, so, I mean, tell us a little bit, Nick, about sort of the opportunity there, just looking at some of those numbers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that's kind of surprising. I at least has I've been kind of keeping an eye on and been surprised by so far is like how we keep like how those sale numbers keep exploding. And I don't think I don't think this stat is for e-commerce specifically, but I know last year we saw a big bump in e-commerce, like online shopping specifically during that time. Obviously, the pandemic influenced a lot of that. But even like relative to years before and things like that, like it was like e-commerce was taking a home a bigger slice of the pie, and was still growing. Like if you compared it like to how retail had done during the same period. Yeah, yeah. So just the fact that it's still a growing opportunity means that there's still room for new folks to get in on it, and for folks who have been doing promotions around this time of year to keep stepping up their game and trying new things and finding what works for their customers, for their market.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, and kind of tying into that, e-commerce spending went up over 15% Cyber Monday in 2020. Um, I had a list here at some point from really 2016 to 2020, and it was just staggering how quickly, just in 4 or 5 years, that spending has gone up on Cyber Monday. I mean, customers are ready to spend money online. That's the reality, especially given the pandemic. We're you know we're primed for buying things online and having them shipped to us and delivered, and just used to it. That's just what it looks like these days. And then we have, you could lose 6% or more of customers due to missing payment options that work for them. We'll kind of get into that a little bit more on the next slide, I think, so I won't go too deep into that. But the point there being is you need to be ready, or you could miss out on a lot of money this time of year. So I'm just going to go ahead and we'll get into payment gateways and gateway plugins. So, just sort of briefly, what this even is, this is how your site will accept major credit cards, e-checks, and more with, companies like GoDaddy Payments, Authorize.net, PayPal, Bambora, and a few others. Do you want to tell us a little bit more, Nick, about why these are useful, why this is necessary?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on the very basics, like a payment gateway, a gateway plugin within WooCommerce is how you're going to accept payment on your site. I like to think of this kind of as as a sort of like in person shopping, like retail equivalent. It's the card reader, right? It's the little device that you have at the checkout stand that actually like accepts the card. It handles the communication of all that stuff to to the processor and then to the banks and stuff. And we'll talk a little bit more about like what all that looks like. But this is that terminal that you have on your e-commerce site that's going to allow you to accept payments. And while like it might feel like yeah, they're kind of all the same, there's actually like some good reason to put some thinking into like which gateway you want to be using and what makes sense for you. um yeah, and again we'll talk more about that, but just to kind of set up that yeah, this is kind of your way of accepting payments, and it's and as such like a crucial part of your e-commerce site. It's something that's actually like worth putting some time and thought into.
Yeah, speaking a little bit more of kind of how this whole system works, I think we have a slide here that just sort of talks about payment processing. Nick, you want to walk us through what we're looking at here on the screen?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're talking about WooCommerce sites here. So that's the kind of front end website that we're dealing with, and on that you're going to have your maybe your gateway plugin that's going to allow you to accept payment information in some form on your site, and that then gets communicated to the gateway processor. So if you have what was some of our examples on there? I don't know. I've been working with folks on an Elevon connection, an Elevon plugin. And so that would then go and be that information goes from their website to Elevon for their processing. I think our flow here is maybe more of like the money, I guess, than the data. So the Elevon will actually do like perform the capture, and that's where like any like fraud checks or security checks will occur. And then that money that gets captured there ends up in your merchant account. Usually, that's with a lot of times that's with the same company, so you have like an Elevon merchant account. And then from that merchant account, you can transfer it to your bank. A lot of those can be automated. But yeah, just I guess main note here is just that this is kind of the lay of the land, and that there's a little bit more involved, right, than just somebody clicks a button and I get money. There's a couple steps involved in there, and it's really helpful to know that going into this. So you can just kind of be aware of what decisions you're making as you're, choosing a payment processor or choosing some particular settings on your gateway plugin or something that might impact how this process actually flows. Just to be aware of like what these steps are at this point.
Yeah, definitely. So it's good to kind of get this foundation of what's happening behind the scenes. But of course, we'll talk about it here in a minute. The good news is that there are pieces in place here, right? WooCommerce plugins that can help. Sometimes the gateway and the merchant are together as one service, so that simplifies the process as well. So um, yeah, we can talk about how that gets a little bit more streamlined. But it's good to just see this chart, I think, here and see the flow and see what's going on behind the scenes. With that, let's talk about choosing and installing a payment plugin. Um, Obviously, you're gonna need one of these payment gateways to be able to accept any kind of payment at your site, which is super important, obviously. So, what are some of the things that people should look out for, Nick, when they're trying to consider what gateway to install and use potentially?
Yeah, I think the most basic one that usually comes to mind for folks is like the transaction fees or any sort of processing fees or account fees or anything like that. So obviously, like when it comes down to like bottom lining, that's kind of that's kind of the basic concern is, like how much am I getting charged per transaction? Do I have to pay like a monthly fee to keep this account running or something like that? So that's the first thing, is just to be able to compare those, and a lot of merchant accounts will have like different structures for their fees. So it's something just to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. Like, is this the charge per transaction, and does that have anything to do with like volume? Is there any impact of volume on that, or is that just like a flat rate? That sort of thing. So yeah, obviously, definitely something to look out for. But I think some of the more like hidden costs maybe come in with setup and management, where if you're spending a lot of time getting it set up, or if you have to troubleshoot a lot, that's gonna cost you money. That's gonna take your time and money to keep that working. And so something that's easier to set up, easier to manage as you go along is going to help reduce the sort of long-term costs of that choice. Kind of a make or break that a lot of folks maybe aren't looking for up front, or aren't aware of to look for, don't know to look for, is just making sure that you can that the gateway accepts payment in your country and your currency. So that's both like for where your store is located, but also thinking about like where your customers are located. There's some other ways to, and it's, can, like with WooCommerce, of course, there's always other ways to do things. Um, there's other ways to make sure that you're, like accepting, that you're able to accept payments in different currencies with like currency switching plugins. But also, that's something that can sometimes be managed at the processor level, where they can, handle all the exchange rates and stuff like that, so that folks can pay in the currency that they need to. Yeah, and then I think the next one is probably like something that we probably don't want to go too much into, just as there's a lot of like legalese around it, and technical language, but like PCI compliance is a big concern. And so seeing what sort of compliance is possible with your gateway plugin is pretty key, and knowing what burden does that put on you as the merchant. Just to kind of dip a toe into that briefly, it basically has to do with security around customer payment information. So, like, where are card numbers stored? How is that information passed? That sort of thing. Um, and yeah, it's ultimately something that is like the responsibility of the merchant. The site owner is responsible for how they're handling that data. But obviously, like, different plugins will have their own different approaches to sort of allow for those different compliance levels depending on what you need. So being aware of what software you're choosing and how that handles data, and then what kind of burden that puts on you as the site owner, is just really important up front to know, like, am I doing everything I need to make sure that our payment information is secure.
Yeah, just to be extra clear on there, if there's a payment gateway or plugin that is saving card numbers to your site's database, that is not the one to go with. You do not want to have customer card information in your database. That should all be stored at a payment gateway or merchant account. Those should handle that. They're set up for that, and your site should not be storing those. It should be letting the responsibility of that fall to the right folks there. Cool. Let's talk about connecting to a payment gateway development environment. Your payment gateway plugin should have at least two connection options: development and production. One of these is going to be used for testing, and the other is going to be used for your live site. Nick, do you want to tell us a little bit more about connecting to a development environment?
Yeah. So this is kind of the first step. Once you've got your plugin installed, is to be able to start actually testing the connection with the processor, and also making sure that orders are processed correctly, as you would expect. We do have a note there that the development option, it goes by a lot of different names, just because the different gateways have their own names for what those accounts are. So you might see it as staging or testing or demo or sandbox. And likewise with production, I think I've seen at least like production and live. So just know that those are kind of different names for the same thing. The idea here is that, like, a staging account or a staging connection, or yeah, a staging account allows you to test the connection and make sure that the data is being handled in the way that you expect. So when you're setting this up, and we have the screenshot there that shows an example, with the application ID and private key for the staging specifically. So that's just something to be aware of, that the credentials there, the ID and the key, those will be different in most cases between your like staging and your live or staging and production environments. And so you just need to make sure that it's really usually as simple if you're getting a plugin that is easy to set up. As we mentioned, it's usually as simple as just like copy and pasting those like two fields, or maybe there's three, depending on what all you're doing. But it's usually just a copy paste, but you just need to make sure that you're copying the right ones. That's a really common mistake to make when you're getting set up, is not being sure which environment keys are which. So yeah, make sure you get the staging ones in there and that you're connected that way. Most gateways will also have guides to testing, and what sort of things you can use when you're testing. So once you have the connection set up, which is usually, like I said, as simple as just entering that information, um, you want to obviously start processing some test orders. And something to look out for there. And Marcus, stop me here. If do we have a slide to talk about this later? Am I jumping ahead?
I'm not sure. We do have a few more about testing things, but that's okay.
Let me
Go
look
ahead.
here. Okay, yeah, no. Um, okay, yeah, actually we do. So yeah. So I guess we'll get into the test orders here in a minute. So just for right now, focusing on just like testing that connection, getting the right information into the right fields there. Again, it should be a pretty straightforward thing for uh, depending on the plugin and the processor that you're connecting with. But just to be aware of that, there might be a couple different app IDs or private keys floating around. So making sure you get the right ones.
Yep, I wasn't gonna cut you off when you're on a roll. Yeah, I mean, same. I mean, that's the same thing that I would add there is the number of times that I've seen and even done like switching and putting the production credentials and the testing on the testing side or putting the testing credentials on the live side. That's just the easiest thing to do. So make sure that you just double check those, make sure that you're putting the right one in the right place. That's the fastest way for it to fail, even though it feels like you did nothing wrong.
And
Um,
then I guess like one
yeah,
other thing that I see there a lot is that you'll probably have like a merchant account to sign in to like your authorized.net or your PayPal merchant account. And these like they might be called like the password or something, like it might be the staging password, but that's not the same thing as what you use to log in to the site for your merchant account. These are going to be specific keys that you can access from within that account. Yeah, just another thing that I see a lot where folks are like, well, this is the password I used to log in and it works, but that's not the same thing that we're talking about here. So yeah.
yep, that's true. Um, yeah, so there are some other settings that you're going to see on those pages where you're adding in the the API keys and all of that to connect to the sandbox, to the development gateways. And we just wanted to kind of touch on a couple of the other settings just real quick, just so you get an idea a little bit of what they are. The first one we have here is authorize versus capture. Essentially, there are two different methods that you can choose for collecting payments. One is one sort of leads to the other, one sort of jumps the other. I probably made that more confusing instead of less confusing. Nick, do you want to tell us a little bit more about authorize and capture settings?
Yeah, yeah. So capture is so yeah, these are like the two basic settings for what like this is basically like what happens when somebody like hits submit payment or submit order or whatever your button says on your site. Like what are we actually trying to do there? At the end of the day, you're going to want to capture money at some point. That's the thing that the processor does that makes the money go from the customer to you. um, so that's kind of the key transaction step, right? But depending on what industry you're in and the expectations there, or sometimes it's like different fulfillment practices might warrant where you don't want to capture right away, and you want to authorize instead. Like say if you don't know the final cost of an order at the time that it's placed, and this can be due to a lot of different like production and fulfillment considerations. But you might want to authorize a payment up front, which is basically just kind of putting a hold on the customer's account and saying, hey, we're going to take up to like this amount of money from their account at some point, but you're not actually getting that money on your end yet. So then later on down the line, you'll be able to like within WooCommerce, you can like manually process the capture itself for an authorized, like a pre-authorized order. So again, just like two options that are very different kind of payment flows. And so it's really important to know upfront like what it is that how you're wanting the plugin to operate, and what makes most sense for your business, just so you can get that going right away and then test those in all of your, with the staging and then again with the production. Yeah, especially like if you're using authorized, that's obviously going to add some steps in there, where you'll want to test like that the authorization goes through correctly and then that you're able to capture based on that authorization in the way that you want. The capture is a little more straightforward. It's just kind of happening right away. But again, you just want to make sure that you're setting it up the way that you want right up front. That's why we wanted to mention this first, to get that going before we get into actually like placing test orders and things.
Yep, cool. Thank you for better explaining what I was trying to do at the beginning there. The other one that we wanted to just point out real quick is detailed decline messages and debug logging. These are just a couple of ways to give you a little bit more information about what's happening when a purchase is being placed. Nick, you just want to maybe briefly walk us through both of these things and why they might be useful?
Yeah, yeah. So I think the slide covers pretty well, like what those two settings are doing. Detailed decline is on the front end. You're seeing a rejection message or a decline message of some sort if a payment doesn't go through. Um, for different reasons, you may or may not want that to include some more information, or less information, depending on your concerns. But I think, yeah, the image we have there of the in the red bar there, that's a like a detailed decline message saying like, okay, the problem is with the card verification number specifically. Rather than just saying, I think the typical like WooCommerce not detailed decline message is just oh my gosh, I'm totally spacing on it now. I thought I could just pull it out of my head, but I don't totally remember it. But it's just like it didn't work. Try again, basically. um, and so yeah, you can if the plugin that you're using has the option, you can turn on these more detailed messages to give customers kind of some guidance in maybe how they could correct that. So that way, yeah, they can sort of know what's going on. It's also helpful when you're testing, of course, to know for yourself like what's going on. So like to get even further on that side of like the testing and understanding on your end is the debug logging. So this will, for most gateways, will start logging like all activity of the gateway on into the plugin logs on your site, or the WooCommerce logs on your site. So whether it's like a successful transaction or a rejected one, there will be some message there that like tracks that there was activity. And this is obviously super helpful when something goes wrong, to really be able to get into, for either yourself or for a developer, to see like exactly what it is that's going wrong and what error messages there are. Basically, a lot of like the stuff that's being tracked there is all the communication that you're in our sort of chart diagram. It's the step between your website and the gateway, right? And so any information that's being passed back and forth there should be tracked there, and then you can see like where things are going wrong specifically. And if a lot of times the gateway will send back a more specific message and say like, you can't do this because you're like, this certain setting isn't enabled in your accounts, and obviously that's not something that you ever want to show up on the front end of your site. So it's not something that would show up in the customer facing decline message, but it can be really actionable if you're trying to get set up for the first time, or you're troubleshooting some problems that you're having with payments on your site. Enabling debug will allow you to see under the curtain a little bit of what's going on. Yeah, I think the last note on that would maybe be just that it's very helpful to have debug mode enabled in some form while you're testing. So while you're in the development or sandbox or staging environment, whatever it's called, you're basically already saying like, hey, I want to be testing and seeing what's going on. There's a chance that this might not work. And if it doesn't work, it's really helpful to have the logging enabled so you can look back and see like what happened and what you need to do. Yeah, most debug modes will have a couple options where you can like display them on the front end, which again like I would only ever do when testing. Or you can have it saved to a log, which maybe if you're in like a staging, or sorry, if you're on the production side of things and you've already started collecting payments but you're seeing issues with it, the save to log method is helpful, because then you as the site owner get access to that information, but it's not just like printing out on the front end.
Yeah, awesome. These are definitely super helpful to have turned on for testing purposes. Just because they give you varying amounts of detail, right? You definitely want the
Mm.
customer one to be detailed enough that they get an idea of what's going on without really, you know, dumping the whole kitchen sink of what's going on under the hood onto the screen. But then you want all that information if you're a developer or you're trying to troubleshoot your gateway not working out so well. You want to know what's happening so that you can take appropriate action there. Awesome. Um, so once you've got those things set up, you have some settings in place, you've connected your gateway account using your API keys. Make a purchase using the development environment. Make sure that it works, that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Don't leave your purchase reliability to chance. Test each of your gateways, right? You might have more than one, so make sure that you're testing all of them. Test each of them in development mode. What sorts of things should people be looking out for when they're testing their purchases in the development environment, Nick?
Yeah. So on top of like having debug enabled, so that way you're tracking all the activity ahead of time. Some things to look out for. This is where I was starting to mention earlier. Your payment gateway might have some specific guidelines on how to operate within their like sandbox or staging mode. I know there's the requirements there and the expectations there can vary pretty widely, so it's worth taking a look at. Some of the details on that, like that we mentioned here, are like test card numbers or test amounts. Different gateways allow you to use different like test like fake cards essentially, and they also have different expectations. For the most part, the expectation is that you will not use an actual credit card number when you're operating in a development environment. That's generally the rule. There might be some exceptions out there, but that's generally the rule, and that's why you need these test card numbers, just to make it very clear to everybody involved in the process that like this is not a real transaction. No money needs to be moved. We're just trying to test our connection. There's also different card numbers for different results that you're looking for a lot of times, so you can test and see like, hey, what happens on my site if somebody's card gets declined? Like, what messages do they see, and what do I see on my end? A lot of times, a gateway will allow you to enter a specific card number to trigger that result. The other way that some gateways do this, and sometimes it's both, so these are both important to be on the lookout for, is the actual like amount, the transaction amount. This one can be really tricky because you might have just set up, like in our example in the screenshot there, we just set up a test product that's $100 and we're ordering 2 of them. And we're gonna see how that gets processed for our credit card transaction. But like, depending on your gateway, they might have rules in place that that will cause the gateway to behave differently when it's in test mode based on that transaction amount. And it's sometimes it's like even like the specific like cent value. So anything ending in like 93 cents will trigger a specific reaction from the gateway, which is great for being able to test and like see what happens when that error happens on your site, but can be really tricky and something that if you don't know to be on the lookout for, your test product and tax or whatever, however the final total ends up being calculated, might end up being 93 cents at the end of the day. And then turns out like you're triggering this failed message, and like the gateway thinks intentionally that you're trying to fail, and you're actually like just confused as to why this product won't be purchased on your site. So those are 2 big ones to look out for. Make sure you're using the right test card numbers. See if there's any limitations around the test amount, like the actual amount being captured, kind of test captured here. And then yeah, just kind of make sure that you're testing all of your different combinations of things. We talk about testing discounts at this point, to make sure that those are being applied correctly. And then also like making sure that your tax and shipping rates and stuff, this is a good time to make sure that basically anything that's happening on the checkout page, right as somebody's about to place their order, excuse me, that all of that is lined up and working how you want it to. You're still in a test environment, so there's not going to be any weird charges on anybody's card because of this. So now's kind of the time to make sure that everything's tuned in. Yeah, I think that's the main thing at this point. Yeah, it's just making sure you're really kind of testing stuff out there.
Yeah, awesome. I just dropped into the chat
Mm,
the usual 4 and then 15 ones following it as kind of a default test number. Almost all gateways will accept that as the test number.
yep,
I really just tossed that there to say that when you're in testing mode, like you said, there are different credit card numbers that will trigger different transactions. But that one almost always is the successful transaction, given everything is filled in correctly. And that way you're not spending your own money in test mode. It's nice to be able to know that you can just use test card numbers and not have to worry about jumping through hoops with your own bank and refunding things to yourself, and all
right.
of that, so you can make as many purchases as you want, and make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to be working.
Yep.
All right. Once you make a test purchase, you want to make sure that you ensure the receipt of your confirmation emails. We have a little screenshot here from the WooCommerce backend. These are kind of all the emails that are enabled by default. You can disable some of them, but should make sure that the ones that are enabled are indeed being sent successfully. Usually, but at the very least, one email to you as the store owner and one email to the customer for confirmation. What are some other things that people should be on the lookout for here, or some tips as they look to make sure that the confirmation emails are coming in successfully?
Yeah, yeah. I think at this point, like the main focus is just on really like the actions being triggered, right? Like the email is being sent, and then on the deliverability side, making sure that that email is received, right? So that your site is sending it out and it's being received. Those are the main things. We'll talk a little bit more about like customizing these emails and what you might want to do with them. But while we're in the development mindset and the testing mindset, the main thing at this point is like, or the first thing at least, is making sure just like the transaction of that email is happening. Yeah, so this is kind of the default WooCommerce email setup here. And so familiarizing yourself with these at least enough to the point of where you know what email is being sent when is pretty important. It can change a little bit depending on your like order processing flow, right? So like if you look at the customer emails or the last after the first three, all the rest of them there are going to the customer. A lot of those are based on the order status. So obviously, if your order comes in and you place it in, and you expect it to go into one status versus the other, there's going to be a different email that gets sent out to the customer. So just knowing what to expect and also what status needs to be reached in order to trigger an email in the first place. So you might be wondering why emails aren't being sent at all, and it turns out that like, oh, my email never reached the completed status or never reached on hold. And if you think that you might ever use any of those, it's pretty important to test all of those at this point. Once you get some test orders in, it's pretty easy in WooCommerce to just kind of like change the status on the order in the back end, and then you can make sure that that email was sent. Yeah, we have a couple notes here about like improving deliverability and email logging. Marcus, did you want to talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, so we have a couple of bullet points here just for deliverability and for logging. These are going to be the ones that help you make sure that sort of the underlying systems are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So when we talk about installing an email deliverability plugin like WP Mail SMTP, for example, what your site does by default when one of these emails is triggered is it'll use some server PHP functions to try and send that email, which most of the time works just fine. But on occasion, the inbox of who's receiving the emails will see that it didn't come from a real email address. It'll see that it came from a site. Some of those get flagged as spam or just marked as kind of suspect, and maybe don't make it quite to where they're supposed to. So what we recommend is adding something like WP Mail SMTP, and what that plugin does is it allows you to connect your site to a real email account that will then send out those emails for you. And what that does is on the other end, the inbox says, okay, this came from a real email address, came from a real email server. Nothing suspect about that. That seems totally fine, and that'll help with the deliverability. And then the other one here is Mail Poet, and this is more about logging emails on the way out. So if you're not getting the emails that you think you should be getting, you want to make sure that your site's actually sending the emails in the first place. So having something like Mail Poet to log outbound emails will allow you to see which emails that your site is actually sending out. So if it's sending out the new order email to you as an administrator and then you're just not getting it, then the problem is somewhere in the pipeline of on the receiving end more so than on the sending end necessarily, because you have in the log that your site triggered that and that it actually was that it should have gone out, that it went out, you should have received it. So those are just a couple. There are plenty of others, but just conceptually making sure that your emails are indeed sending out, that they're being triggered, and then the reliability of them being delivered on the other end.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'd add like one note, like just while we're in kind of like development mode thinking, you might be doing this testing on a staging site or somewhere where you have, or like just like before your site is actually live, and you might have emails disabled on it one way or the other. And so this is something like MailPoet or anything that will log the outbound emails can be really useful in still getting a record that those actions were triggered and like that the email would have sent, even if you have that disabled to prevent any like weird emails going out to your customers or something like that. You still get a record that at least it was, that WooCommerce tried to send it. So you can make sure that those actions are all firing correctly. I'd still say like when you're going live, you want to test the whole pipeline and make sure that it does arrive in an inbox, the deliverability end of things. But yeah, the email logging can be helpful while you're in a staging setup to still see like what's happening within the site.
Cool. All right. I want to make sure that we leave ourselves a little bit of time for Q&A at the end as we're starting
Oh
to
yeah.
approach the top of the hour. So let's run through. I don't think we have too many more, but let's run through these and we can quickly talk about them. Customizing confirmation emails, like you mentioned before, we were sort of focused on making sure that they're being delivered, but it's definitely also an opportunity for you to customize these as well. Create clean and practical order confirmation emails that include order details, discounts, upsells. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about why you might want to take that opportunity to use the confirmation email to do any of that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So real quickly, we do have a couple plugins mentioned there for doing that customization work. It's also stuff that you can do in if you have like a developer on your team, can do just in the WooCommerce files. You can write your own email templates essentially. But those plugins will really help you do that in a way that kind of fits more in with the standard sort of WordPress backend editing, that sort of stuff, rather than having to really code it all out. But yeah, so editing these emails once you've picked your tool, is being able to add things here is super valuable because these transactional emails are like the most opened emails that you'll ever send. We do a lot of work on getting the marketing emails dialed in just right and things like that, to try and like increase open rates and stuff. And I think like order confirmation emails have something like 95% or even higher like open rates. Honestly, like it makes a lot of sense. It's it's I spent my money and I want to be able to find out when I'm getting things and make sure that it went through properly and stuff for the customers. So make sure to hit those points in that email of doing the basic transactional stuff of letting them know like what they ordered and that you received it. But also, yeah, it's a great spot if you can to include some sort of either promotional or send a deal like a thank you deal or something like that. It's a great spot to include that stuff as a little extra touch for somebody who did just complete an order on your site.
Yeah, that open rate is just insane, right? If there was ever a time where you wanted to, add some additional information that that they're going to see, it would be in that confirmation email because almost guaranteed it's going to get opened.
Hmm.
Um, Along those same lines, though, is customizing the thank you page. If you thought that order confirmation emails being open 95% of the time or so is high, then 100% of everyone is going to land on this thank you page after they've made an order. So there's definitely an opportunity here as well to include some of those same things. Nick, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what sort of tools or things that you might want to put on the thank you page that might help as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, this is really similar to the confirmation email, but I think at this point, like it's maybe like there's less of a transactional expectation on the thank you page, right? And in the confirmation email, they're expecting to see some tables there that explain what they ordered and maybe a shipping link or something like that if you already have that, depending on your flow. But yeah, at this point I think this page is really frankly like overlooked a lot, as far as like usability to kind of surprise and delight customers who have just again like just completed a transaction on your site. Like you have them completely on the hook at this point, right? As far as all of your marketing efforts have just like paid off and they are like totally bought in, um, it's a great time to be like, hey, you might also want these certain things. Also, just kind of within the data structure of WooCommerce pages, you have like all of the order data at this point, so you can target, to specific products that they ordered, or whatever you might want to pull from the order data itself. Check if they're already signed up for your newsletter by looking at the email in the order, and if it's not signed up, you can hit them with a call to action that has folks sign up for an email. I think, yeah, our example there shows a really cool one where you add a link, the save as PDF link there, essentially like lets the customer get a receipt. If you think about, again, going to retail analogies here, like somebody just got to checkout, it's a super common thing is just to ask like, hey, do you want a receipt with that? So you can offer that there on your thank you page. Yeah, we've got a couple of plugins there that'll help you with that. The thank you page it's like part of WooCommerce. It's not like a page that you add on your site separately. So for editing it, you want to use like mostly like a plugin, or you're doing your own custom development work there to change like what appears on that page. But yeah, things like cross-selling, newsletter signups, printed receipts. Again, any of the stuff that you could put in the confirmation email also would be a great fit here. If you want to throw a discount code on there or something like that, like totally good.
Yeah, that 100% open rate, if you will, on this thank you page just always makes it just
Right.
a no brainer to add things to this page um, that would help increase sales and conversions. Cool. Let's see. So we've done a lot of testing and customizing, and let's say everything's working. It's time to go from staging to live. When you're ready to go live, check to make sure that everything is still working as expected. What are some of the steps here that folks would want to take to take their development environment and go live with it?
Yeah. A lot of this is kind of the same, just like a repeat of what we did with the development staging environment as well, right? You want to switch over in your settings to production or live or whichever it is. Make sure that you copy over the credentials from your merchant account, so that you're connecting to the correct production environment on that end. And then, yeah, like if you've already done your testing and you've already, made sure that the emails are being sent or are customized how you want, and the checkout page is customized how you want and all that, then you can hop right in and like place test orders. At this point, you'll probably be using a live credit card. So that's just something to be aware of. It helps a lot to like create a really cheap product on your site only for testing purposes. So that you can, not have to actually buy your $1,000 cheese grater. Random idea. Anyways,
Yeah,
um,
and discount codes can help there too. If you want to
yes,
test those same products but not spend as much on them, you can create your own discount codes. And the other
right,
thing to note there
exactly.
is that you won't have the silly, different cent values stuff to get in the way, that
Mhm.
might produce false declines and stuff like that. That's only on the testing side.
Right. Yeah. And then at this point, yeah, you're testing a lot of the same things. You want to make sure that your emails are being sent when you're in live and that they contain all the right information. And then once that's up and running and you've had a couple successful transactions, you're free to turn off the debug logging that we advised earlier. That's just mostly just like a server memory thing. That like if you're constantly logging all activity, then it will take up more and more room. So it's good to just leave that off unless you know that you're going to be looking at it and want to see it.
Cool. All right. So we're starting to get to the end here of the slides and of time. So think that we just have this one more thing, right? So depending on your particular store setup, you might have some other features to test. This isn't going to apply to everyone universally, but we wanted to go ahead and mention a couple of things here just for the more than a handful of stores that may also run into some of these. What are the few other things that people might want to look out for here, if this is for their use case for their stores?
Yeah. I think the most common one is going to be refunds, right? And the only reason we put that on the not quite everybody is just that depending on your gateway and your processor, you might have different ways that they want to process those refunds. WooCommerce has a good like documentation that covers this as far as what gateways allow you to refund directly through WooCommerce. It's called like automated refunds. So you basically just go to the order page and you click refund via your gateway, and it will handle all of that for you. Whereas others, you might have to go into your merchant account and refund the transaction there separately. So either way, whichever setup you have, it's a good time to test it, but it might change depending on what you're using. Other super common one is like subscription or recurring payment orders, making sure both that the initial order goes through and that for most of those you're going to have the customer save a payment method on your site so that you can charge it again later. So make sure that that gets saved, and then make sure that a recurring order gets saved. Another one where you can set up discount codes and a test product so that it's going to renew in an hour rather than in a month, so you don't have to wait a month to test out your recurring payments. Just set up a quick test one that you can make sure that that renewal charge goes through as well. And then lastly, and this isn't like fully like payment related, but more on like the emails and notifications, is any like fulfillment notifications. So once a customer has placed an order, right? Like your job's not done. You have to like fulfill that order. You have to get that to them somehow. And depending on your setup for how you're managing your shop, like that may involve sending messages to a warehouse or to a shipping company or a shipping plugin or integration that you have on your site, or to one of your local retail stores if it's like a local pickup situation. So just making sure that all of those kind of odds and ends of like final communications are getting out so that you can actually like fulfill those orders. And another good thing there is to test, like shipping integrations. Like if you're trying to send tracking numbers to your customers, to make sure that those are being sent correctly.
Yeah, definitely. Again, these aren't necessarily going to apply to everyone, but more than just a few folks. So we wanted to definitely make sure that we called them out here. Um, yeah. So just to kind of quickly recap, what talked about selecting a gateway and merchant account, connecting the gateway test account, and making a test purchase there, and then making sure that you get your order confirmation receipts, along with making sure the thank you page is friendly and helpful and customized. Then connecting the gateway production account and making another test purchase, and confirming the receipt of your order confirmation emails again. And then we quickly talked about just checking some optional items like recurring subscription orders and the ability to process refunds. I ran through that kind of quickly because we are at the top of the hour here. Um, so I'll say thank you for those of you that have hung around. Will continue to hang out here for a few minutes and run through a couple of questions that are in the Q&A tab here. Understand if you have to go since it is the top of the hour, but if you don't mind hanging around and listening to the Q&A, we're going to stick around for just a few more minutes here and talk about some of these. Nick, the first one that I have here was from a little bit earlier on. What is the difference between a merchant account and a gateway?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was like our chart where like there are different steps in the link, right? Um and that one, those two specifically, Marcus, I think you mentioned this, like can sometimes be the same thing. Certain companies will like handle both. But what are those two things? The the gateway is like the processing. This is how like a card number that I put into your website ends up being like gets turned into like something that we can actually transact against, technically. Yeah, so that's the actual processing bit. The merchant account is going to be like you as a merchant, like where does that money end up? Sometimes those can be the same thing where the person who's processing it has you set up a merchant account, so they just process it directly in. They take the money and put it directly in there. But those can be different, and that can be important if you end up like needing to troubleshoot a step along the way, or if you're not sure of what all needs to be set up front. Just knowing that you have both of those things, and really at the end of the day, right, like you're trying to make sure all of this is to make sure that like a customer's money can get to your actual bank. But yeah, I think that covers those two. I don't know, Marcus, if you wanted to highlight any other like differences or.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. We have a few more. I'm going to lump a couple of these together.
Mhm.
Bob asked both of these as well. I've never heard of Elevon. Is this the payment merchant account you recommend, and what advantages does it have over Stripe? And which merchant account allows you to keep your offline store in sync with your online store, like point of sale stuff? Um,
Ooh.
I'm gonna, yeah, I'll softball it to you. Of course, we're gonna be a little bit more biased. Elevon is not us, and I don't not recommend Elevon. Elevon's a great service as well.
Yeah.
But GoDaddy has its own payment system, GoDaddy Payments, which takes care of some of these things as well. Nick, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah. So GoDaddy Payments will allow you to do both the online and the offline, right? Like you can set up like in-store terminals that are processed through them, and then also take your e-commerce transactions through that same gateway. As far as like the Elevon recommendation, like yes, I mean I think broadly like it's there's enough there's enough like reason to choose any particular like payment merchant or processor that it's hard for me to like broadly recommend one, because as we mentioned, like a lot of it depends on like you're accepting your currency and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I would recommend Elevon. I don't know if I would like place it over others, or to me, like they're generally alongside each other, and it really comes down to like which one works best for your use case.
Yep, cool. Marcy says, new to GoDaddy. Hey, welcome, Marcy. Can you tell me what Woo means? Woo is actually just shorthand for WooCommerce. It's just easier to say Woo. So a lot of times it just gets shortened to Woo. Also, what are the differences between GoDaddy and PayPal?
Mm. Um, I don't know, Marcy, if you could clarify in chat. I'm wondering, do you mean like GoDaddy payments in PayPal, or just like GoDaddy and PayPal in general? Happy to talk about that and help out there. On the Woo side, so like Marcus said, Woo is WooCommerce, and that is a software platform that integrates with WordPress. It's plugins all the way down. I know it can get confusing, so it's good to like take a pause and explain it a little bit. WooCommerce is like a WordPress extension that allows you to do e-commerce things on your site. So WordPress was initially established as more of like a blogging platform. So that's where a lot of kind of the thinking about like posts and pages and things comes from in WordPress. WooCommerce was established to turn that into like something where you can sell products and host an entire store. So it'll add things like the shop page and the checkout flow and all that, the cart page, the checkout page, that sort of stuff. Then the payment gateways are extensions of WooCommerce. So those are things that you're adding in to say like, okay, within my online e-commerce store, I want to like specifically accept payments in this way. So kind of to connect it to the retail analogy, and I don't know if this is taking this way too far, but like a WordPress, a site that might be like constructed with WordPress is kind of just like an empty retail building, right? Like so you rent the building. Then like putting WooCommerce in there is saying like, okay, my building is going to be a store. And so that might, you have like your sort of like your checkout line, and you want a wall where you're going to put up your products and things. So WooCommerce kind of helps you get that space set up in that way. And then the like I mentioned earlier, the gateway itself is like, okay, I need my credit card reader at the end of the line to actually take payments. Yeah, I find those analogies to be really helpful. I hope that helped clear it up. As far as like GoDaddy and PayPal, I guess I'll say like GoDaddy Payments does allow you to do some similar things. They both have like payment gateway options. But in general, GoDaddy is more of like a hosting company that does have like some software and can do some managed hosting to where a lot of the stuff is kind of taken care of for you. PayPal is more of like a payment specific company where they're dealing mostly with like transactions and stuff like that. They can overlap. Obviously, you could have your GoDaddy site accept payments through PayPal, but yeah, in general, like that's kind of their domains.
Awesome. We are coming up against the end of our time before this thing is going to cut us off automatically. So I do see that we have a couple of more questions. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time to answer them right at this moment. If you want to, please feel free to reach out to us. There's a contact form on the page for these events at events.godaddy.com. Feel free to fill the form out there, and we'll be happy to answer questions there. Or reach out to us on Twitter at Skyverge, at GoDaddy Pro. Those are all good places. So I'm gonna wrap us up here before it cuts us off. I just wanted to reiterate here that this is part two of a 5-part holiday readiness series. These are all every Wednesday here in October at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific time. If you missed last week's, go ahead and head back to events.godaddy.com to check that out. The recording is up there and you can watch it. The recording for this one will also be up shortly within the next 24 hours or so. But there are 3 more, so make sure that you head to the same place, events.godaddy.com, to register for those 3 and catch those as well. We also have a holiday readiness page that's all about these and additional holiday readiness tips and that sort of thing at godaddy.com/pro/holiday readiness. So if you want to learn more than just this 5-part series, there's some more information there as well. So go check that out. I also wanted to quickly just talk about we talked about a lot of the e-commerce hosting stuff. GoDaddy does have managed WordPress e-commerce hosting, which includes kind of a lot of the stuff that we talked about here, along with lots of other plugins. But over 75 free and premium plugins that you can use for memberships and local pickup. A lot of the payment gateway stuff that we talked about is included there as well. I think it's just about $6,000 worth of premium plugins that's included there, as well as performant hosting, support, free SSL, free domain, and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out Managed WordPress e-commerce hosting. And other than that, that's all I've got. Thanks again, Nick, for joining me today. Really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about all the payment gateway and transaction stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you in the next one.